Last week, Ontario Energy Minister Todd Smith announced that the province had applied to have the life of the Pickering Nuclear Plant extended by another year from 2025 to 2026, and kind of hinted that maybe there might be refurbishments coming that would extend it another 30 years. Well, Professor Mark Winfield, who's environmental studies, York University, has some thoughts on that. Mark, welcome to the interview.
Good afternoon, Markham.
Now, you go back to 2006 when you were working for the Pembina Institute, where you did a life cycle assessment of nuclear plants in Canada. So you've got you actually do have a bit of a different perspective on this, but you don't think this was the right decision. Can you explain that, please?
Well, it's not the right decision for multiple reasons. I mean, the principal one is that Pickering is the oldest nuclear power plant in Ontario. Construction started more than 50 years ago. It was actually scheduled to close in 2018. So we're well into overtime on this plant. It is at end of life. There are more specific technical concerns in terms of specific dimensions of that. But it's fundamentally beyond end of life. And that means that the risk of, as it continues to run, essentially increases every day.
So, okay, so what he said was that they're going to extend it for another year. Then they're going to ask the Ontario Power Generation to do a feasibility assessment to extend it for another 30 years. But your argument is that it's just so old, it should be what, mothballed, demolished, just taken out of service because it's too risky otherwise.
Well, there are a couple of dimensions there. One is, of course, that the IESO itself actually looked at the prospects for a life extension on Pickering B, which is 4 units, in 2009. And the conclusion at somewhere well north of $10 billion was completely uneconomic. There's no reason to believe that's changed. In fact, it's probably even more expensive now as everything is older. The other problem at Pickering beyond age is location. It is the nuclear power plant in North America that is in most proximity to large urban area. I mean, the city of Toronto and Durham region have urbanized enormously around it. That's very unusual. The site itself sits on a minor fault line. So it's very doubtful if, even with the Canadian Nuclear Safety Commission, if you were to propose to build a nuclear power plant at that location today, that you would get approval to do it. There are too many problems with the location.
I'm sure there are, some Toronto residents who are going to be watching this interview. How worried should they be that, Darlington might have an incident?
Well,
something they should be worried about?
It's Pickering, of course. Well,
Sorry.
Pickering has quite a history of accidents, of significant losses of coolant water. The OPG was actually forced to hand out iodine pills for folks within a 10-kilometer radius a few years ago. There was some very good advocacy by the Canadian Environmental Law Association to sort of highlight the extent of the risks in the event of a catastrophic accident there. I mean, it certainly means the impact area is much of the city of Toronto, east of Yonge Street, Pickering and Ajax on the east side as well. So we're talking about a very, very large area that could be affected in the event of some sort of catastrophic event. And as I say, there have been questions being asked about the level of preparedness on the part of OPG around this, and specific measures have had to be taken. So the risks I think are quite significant. As I say, get worse each day that plant operates. It's past its best before date, and all of the components are aging, some in much more specific ways. We've heard from former OPG staff saying the thing needs to close. And indeed, that was the province's plan. I mean, the current plan takes us into some other unpleasant options. But that's where this was supposed to be heading, was that it was supposed to be closed by 2024 at least.
Right. And one of the reasons why the government doesn't have as many options as it potentially could have is it kind of painted itself into a corner, hasn't it?
It's been spectacularly successful in painting itself into a corner. It's left itself with at least at the moment with very few options other than to burn more natural gas, which is of course the trajectory it's on anyway and is anticipated at the moment as the likely replacement for Pickering is to run the gas fleet up further. But just to go back, the province terminated what had been a fairly successful strategy around energy efficiency in 2019 and never replaced it. The province effectively terminated its engagement with renewable energy and famously spent hundreds of millions of dollars canceling the last tranche of renewable energy projects. And we haven't seen anything since then. That was in 2018. And despite repeated overtures from the east side of the Ottawa River from Premier Legault, um, has not responded to offers from Quebec, despite the fact Hydro Quebec continues to have difficulties exporting electricity into the United States, and so it would be a very obvious partner. So the province, at least at the moment, hasn't left itself very many options. I mean, it could pursue them if it chooses to, and indeed, it has new options coming onto the table. As of Friday, there was a very interesting study on the potential contributions of distributed resources, for example, which was the first time anyone's looked at those in any kind of serious or rigorous way. But again, we're not getting any signals from the province about any indication that it's prepared to change course here.
Now, I understand in the Progressive Conservative Party, there's always been a lot of opposition to renewables, and there were a lot of complaints that the Green Energy Act of 2009, the electricity generated was very expensive. But I mean, since then, if you look at the cost curve since 2009, the cost of solar and wind have dropped by at least a factor of 10. And it's now those are now far and away the cheapest way to generate electricity. Solar, I don't know what the solar resources are in Ontario, but it's just dirt cheap and getting cheaper all the time.
We have sunshine, particularly in the summer when we're peaking these days. No, I mean, we know indeed we've also had several efficiency potential studies as well, which make it very clear that there's a lot of space there that is technically achievable, cost effective, and actually achievable in reality. The cost curve on renewables and understanding of technological performance has improved enormously. We're in the midst of a technological revolution around energy storage that we see components of all the time. I say Ontario has this advantage, of course, as we're parked back next to the biggest potential battery in North America, because of course Hydro-Quebec has enormous storage capacity in its system, and in many ways is an ideal partner if you have a large fleet of intermittent renewable resources. And of course, grid integration elements have been coming together as well. But Ontario seems to insist on being an innovation wasteland when it comes to these things. It simply refuses to go there. I mean, we had very late in the Wind government, they had moved to a competitive bid process for commercial scale renewables. So in a sense, we'd solved the problems with the FIT program around Green Energy Act, and we had a much more competitive, much more cost effective way of acquiring renewables. But there is no movement is the only way I can put it. We are on a trajectory for a massive run up of gas-fired generation and seem to have no interest in anything else.
Yeah, it's odd too, particularly because gas prices have been rising in the last year or two, and I mean, we're looking at potential shortages in North America this winter because the Americans have brought on so much LNG export capacity that they're going to the projections are at the moment that they're going to be short on gas.
Yeah.
So, yeah, which means gas prices are going to remain high here. So it is just a mystery to me. And I don't live in Ontario, and I don't know the political culture around all of the energy issues, around the Green Energy Act and so on. But Is this simply a political, an ideology issue, or what are the roots of that refusal to look at other options other than gas or nuclear?
Well, I think this is a very good question because I say the menu seems to get longer and longer in terms of the alternatives. Um, Part of it, I think, was in a sense a form of political neglect, in the sense that the only thing the Ford government was initially worried about with electricity was rates. And I don't think was paying very much attention. It didn't like the Green Energy Act. It was very clear about that. I didn't like high hydro rates, but beyond that, it just didn't pay attention, is the best answer I can give. And so far, it had sort of got away with that the lights stayed on, rates stayed low, and therefore there was no need to pay any attention. Um, we're now hitting a point where chickens are coming home to roost. Things are reaching end of life. We're starting to be confronted with some very, very ugly choices. And it's not clear to me at this stage if the province, how and the province will reengage. I mean, the premier during the election debate this summer said he wanted a 100% clean system. The minister keeps asking about options for a gas phase out, um, but we don't seem to see any actual action in terms of the things you would do if that's what you wanted. Efficiency being the most obvious and the most documented, that we're doing nothing there effectively. And we already have an effective framework for doing that, and we have all kinds of potential studies on what we need to do. Um, it's almost kind of baffling. Why would you not engage more constructively? Um, and I think part of it is that you are also dealing, I mean, it goes to larger questions with the Ford government's approach to governance, which is fundamentally reactive. This is a government that came into office with very little notion of what the provincial government should do other than cut taxes, cut red tape, and cut hydro rates. And this carries them out of that comfort zone and requires a more proactive approach on the part of the provincial government. And I'm not sure they're there yet. They're realizing that managing this file is going to get more complicated. But as a result, here we are faced with some very, very ugly choices between life extending a well past best before nuclear plant on one hand and a massive run up of gas fired generation on the other. These are not good choices, and we need to find another pathway.
Well, Mark, we've talked about this in the past, and I have no doubt we'll be talking about it in the future. So thank you very much for this.
Great. Thank you.